Muslims are welcome here, no hate, no fear. Muslims are welcome here, no hate, no fear. Muslims are welcome here, no hate, no fear. Muslims are welcome here, no fear. Muslims are welcome here, no hate.
Now, our first speaker for today is Adam Bandt, the Greens member for Melbourne, so please make him welcome.
Thanks very much. I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and acknowledge that this land was stolen, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And to Muslim sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum. And I want you to know, as I hope that you can gather from the turnout here, from the flowers that have been laid at mosques by people who have walked past them all their lives and never stepped foot inside them, by the outpourings of grief over the last few days, that we are heartbroken. And we can only imagine the grief that you are going through. And we want you to know that we are feeling it too, because this was not just an attack on you, although it was especially an attack on you. This was an attack on all of us, from people who believe that the colour of their skin makes them better than everyone else. And all of us stand here united to say that that kind of racism and white supremacy has absolutely no place in Melbourne, absolutely no place in Australia, and we will not rest until it is buried. It has been heartbreaking over the last few days, and it will be heartbreaking for days and weeks and years to come. But perhaps the thing that has been hardest to hear as I have spoken to Muslim sisters and brothers over the last few days is how many have said, well, yep, we're actually not surprised, or we were expecting something like this. No one should have to expect something like this. This should not be something that people aren't shocked by because it has become normal to them. But you can see how easily over the last decade or so, last couple of decades, this has become normalised in Australia. We saw it when Pauline Hanson was elected to Parliament and began her campaign of racism and division. And we saw it when John Howard's response to that was not to distance himself from her, but to co-opt fully all of her policies and make them the policies of the government. We saw it when Andrew Bolt penned columns headed the foreign invasion and talked about the difficulties that happen supposedly when people come here daring to think things that are different and have beliefs that are different to us. We saw it when Sunrise gave Pauline Hanson a regular platform to spout her program of racism and division every day. And good on you, good on you, host of Sunrise, for standing up and making the point that, geez, doesn't the Shooters Manifesto in Christchurch read a lot like One Nation's manifesto? Well, yeah, duh, Sherlock, and maybe that's the same manifesto you've given her a platform to spout for every week for the last couple of years. Now, you share some responsibility in this. You share some responsibility in this. And the people who thought it would be a great idea to invite a global far-right commentator to come and sit in Kensington at the doorstep of the flats in Flemington around the corner from me, where 50% of the people there identify as Muslim, and have him give a hate speech as part of his hate tour, and then wonder why kids in those flats felt scared that night as racist and fascists chased them through it. You bear some responsibility for thinking that was a good idea for allowing someone like that to come here. And Peter Dutton, when you say that maybe it was a mistake to have allowed Lebanese Muslims to come here and say, I'm just airing that as a proposal to chuck out there into the mix, or when you think it is an okay idea to try and win votes by saying what people in Melbourne are worried about going out because of African gangs, well, you bear some responsibility for all of this as well, because you have tried to use fear and race and division to win votes, and this is the consequence of that climate that you create. And And we warned you about it at the time. We warned you about it at the time because we have seen here in Melbourne a young Sudanese man being beaten to death by people who said that they were here because they wanted to take their city back. And we have pleaded with you, Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison and everyone else in a position of power, not to use race and Islamophobia and fear to win votes because we know where it ends. But you did not listen, so you bear some responsibility for creating this climate. And we will hold you to account. And Fraser Anning, you have no right to be in the Australian Parliament because you are associating with white supremacists. You are seeking to undermine the very fundamentals of democracy, and 1 million Australians and counting no longer want you in the Parliament because they know you do not believe in democracy. You want to turn our country into something approximating a dictatorship where people are classified and sorted on the basis of their race or the basis of what they believe. And we know that you, Fraser Anning, stand for trying to kick people out of this country, and that is why the Australian public wants to kick you out of Parliament. And if you, Fraser Anning, if you have not heard the message by the time Parliament resumes and done the right thing and stepped down, well, if you are still there when Parliament resumes, the Greens will move in Parliament to remove you. Because if you can be suspended from Parliament for calling someone a liar, if you can be suspended from Parliament for calling someone a pig, then you can definitely be suspended from Parliament for associating yourself with white supremacists and blaming people who have just been massacred for their own massacre. You do not deserve to be there because you are undermining the fundamentals of democracy. And this has crossed over from being about freedom of speech into whether or not the fundamentals of our democracy are going to be preserved. And the Australian people are onto you. But can I also say, Scott Morrison, you do not get to wash your hands of this, you hypocrite, because all of this happened under your watch and with your blessing. And when you could have taken the opportunity over the last couple of days to stand up, as we have seen not that far over the ditch, where, you know, I'm sure half of the Liberal Party is still suffering shock because they've seen what happens when a leader is compassionate and stands up in the form of the Prime Minister of New Zealand. But Scott Morrison, you could have taken the last couple of days to say we are going to reset debate in Australia in the way that the people of Australia so clearly want. But no, he's out on the front page of the paper today saying, I'm still going to come at it from another angle. I'm going to come at it in coded form, and I'm going to talk about the need to limit population growth, and I'm going to talk about the need to restrict migration, because he's learnt that that's the way of saying the loud part quietly. Fraser Anning's mistake, as far as those white supremacists were concerned, was that he said the quiet part loud. Well, now Scott Morrison has learnt nothing, but he is going to try to continue a campaign of fear and division. And so, Scott Morrison, we are going to hold you to account as well. And we cannot wait, because it is only going to be a matter of weeks before you are turfed out on your ear for using the politics of fear and division. This is a very, very hard time. And to all our brothers and sisters who are being hurt by racism and Islamophobia and the growing fascism in Australia, we stand with you. But this is also the beginning of the end of racism. This is the beginning of the end of the politics of fear and division. This is the beginning of the end of white supremacy in this country. The Australian people have now worked out that it has become far too normalised in this country what the consequences are. We will make sure that your politics of fear and division is never welcome in Australia. Scott Morrison, Fraser Anning, Peter Dutton, we are coming to take that dog whistle off you and bury it forever.